When I first started learning about herbs, I was studying with Native American people, different Native American people that I was living among, and I just had a natural affinity for learning about plants, and I just never stopped. And that's how most of the people are that I know that study herbalism. For some reason, they got into it, and they just never stopped. You know, and the magic is the plants and the earth. That's the real magic of it. And in the West, we try to break things down into medicines and physiological activity and things like that, but most of us are into it because it really gives us a connection with life. And it's the same life, natural life, that gives us our health and our life. It's not separate. That's one of the things that, you know, that really fills me up as far as working with herbs. I don't think I could live in a city if I didn't work with plants in some way. It gives you that connection. And it's a connection that everybody can develop. You know, you can develop it as soon as you walk out the door. Just maybe you'll see one of the slides and you'll say, hey, I know that plant. It grows in my backyard. And you'll start looking at it in a different way because now you'll know something more about it, something different about it than you never knew before. So more than anything, I like to try to get that, you know, turn you guys on to start looking at the plants as buddies and friends. When I first started, you know, living on reservations, herbalism is very simple in a lot of ways. Simple remedies, single remedies. And then from there, I moved to the Virgin Islands, United States Virgin Islands, and was studying the ethnobotany of the Virgin Islands and how to use bush medicine down there. And had a health food store, an herb store. And more people would come with sort of complicated questions, you know, that weren't as simple and as easy to deal with as they were in the past, so to speak. And I realized that I needed to learn what I consider to be a more comprehensive system of herbalism that was a total system of medicine. And I was led to Chinese medicine. And that's what brought me to California. I left the Virgin Islands and did a 3-year clinical apprenticeship in studying traditional Chinese medicine with a man named Michael Tierra. And I worked with him for 3 years in his clinic, and then I did 2 years pre-med at college, and then a year in acupuncture school to try to get me, you know, really grounded into traditional Chinese medicine. And so right now, I sort of mix them all. Basically, I follow the principles of traditional Chinese medicine because it is a semi-complete system of diagnosis and therefore therapeutic applications for the plants. But in understanding the principles of Chinese medicine, it doesn't mean that you need to use Chinese herbs. You can use whatever food, whatever herb you want, whatever vitamin you want, as long as you understand basic principles about how to apply them and also how to look at people's constitutions and diseases, so to speak. Are there any questions that anybody has before I get started? I know I asked most of the people what they wanted to talk about. Yes.
Just in the last week, I've been thinking I'd like to understand more about homeopathy, or is it homeopathy and naturopathy, and what connections to herbs and things that you're studying have to do with that. I don't even know what the definitions are.
Sure. Homeopathy is a system of herbalism unto itself, and it's based on the premise that herbs work much better in diluted potencies, that the more you dilute it, the actual more potent it becomes, almost similar to the idea of vaccination, where you give a little bit of the bacteria to make you immune to something else, or the treatment of snake bites. You give snake venom to treat snake bites. There's 2 basic doctrines in homeopathy as far as I know. One is you treat like with likes, snake venom for snake bite, and the law of potentized dilutions. The more you dilute something, the stronger it becomes. As far as they're concerned, what they feel is that you capture the essence of the plant the more you dilute it, but in specific ways. They don't just keep diluting it. They do it in specific ways, breaking it down, mixing it with one part of the medicine with 10 parts of another medium, and they shake it up 100 times, and they keep on doing that. And to them, it gets stronger and stronger. The fact of the matter is that homeopathy I've seen work very, very well. Most Western scientific people feel that it's only placebo. Personally, I don't feel that because I've seen babies and children who have very little placebo has very little to do with dealing with children unless you specifically really, you know, try to do that. Children are like, you know, blank blackboards and open doors, you know. You just give them the right thing and it works for them a lot of times. And the fact of the matter is homeopathy works very, very well for children and animals, and that you can't really, contribute to the placebo effect. Naturopathic medicine basically came out of Western Europe, mostly England, old day England and Germany, with the baths, and herbalism was a big part always has been a big part of naturopathic medicine, or the nature cure. But that also went along with hydrotherapy, exercise, dietary therapy, being out in the open, fresh air, sunshine, water, swimming, things like that. So herbalism was always a part of naturopathic medicine. There's 2 naturopathic schools in the United States, one in Portland, one in Seattle, Washington, and both of them dabble in herbalism. I checked out their curriculum, and there's nowhere near the type of herbal study that one really needs to really know herbalism. It's kind of sad.
So where do you go?
Well, there's a number of schools. There are a number of schools that specifically deal with in herbalism. Colorado Herbal Institute is one, and then there's the California School of Herbal Studies in Northern California. There are a number of correspondence courses that are out. You can learn a lot from correspondence courses, but it doesn't come near to having experience. The thing is, any school you go to, any course of training that you take, all it does, it gives you the basics. Then after that, you have to build in your experience and your practice. And hopefully you can get hooked up with somebody who really knows this stuff, who has experience doing it. I've been lucky, because most of my teachers have been really old people. Right now, one lives in Santa Cruz. She's 92. She delivered her first baby when she was 14 years old. And it is the days of heroic medicine where the split, as far as I know, actually happened back in the 14th century with a guy named Paracelsus. Paracelsus originally was an herbalist, from what I know of him. And he started playing with heavy mineral drugs. And these mineral drugs promoted really drastic actions in the body, really strong laxatives, strong purgatives. And for the first time, they were able to see noticeable results and actions of the medicines that they would prescribe. Before that, herbs are generally much more gentler and work over a longer period of time than drugs that are used in acute crisis intervention. Because they could physically see how these medicines were acting, I think that's what turned them onto it. They can say, yeah, we can see this guy throw his guts up, or have a real cathartic action in the body, or promote really strong diaphoresis. And there were probably a lot of people that benefited from them, but there were as many that died from it. But for some reason, they kept with it. And I don't know why that is. Because back in the 1800s in this country, and centered around Cincinnati, there was a group of doctors called the eclectic medical practitioners. There were also a group of herbalists called the Thomsonians. There were also the physiomedicalists, were sort of combinations of the two, so people think. The fact of the matter is there were many different schools of medical thought that existed in the United States, but also predominantly in Cincinnati, because that's where the Lloyd brothers were. And they were from Kentucky, actually. And there was always a battle between what were called the herbal doctors or the homeopaths and the mineral doctors. The mineral doctors were, the doctors we have now, they're the descendants of the mineral doctors from that school of thought that uses hardcore drugs rather than gentle remedies, whereas the other guys practice botanical or herbal medicine. And interestingly enough, the homeopaths were the most successful of all the medical professions in the early part of this country. The homeopaths were. There's a funny story that Barbara Griggs mentions in a book called Green Pharmacy, in which the mineral doctors, wanting to establish themselves as professionals, as the true medical professionals of the time, decided to erect a statue in Washington, D.C. of their hero, Dr. Benjamin Rush, who was like the king of the bleed and purge and pukum school of medicine, but interestingly enough, also met with herbalist Samuel Thompson, and interestingly enough, also, he was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And his words were there should be freedom of medicine as there is freedom of religion. But for some reason it didn't get in there. But in any case, they wanted to erect a statue of Benjamin Rush. It would have cost them $16,000 to erect. They put out, they asked for donations from their professional membership, which consisted of about 400 people at the time. And in the first year, they raised about $600. The second year, they got a pittance like $275, something like that. Make a long story short, the homeopaths found out about it. They decided to erect a statue of their hero, Samuel Hahnemann. The first year, they raised $20,000. Samuel Hahnemann is the only statue of a physician in Washington, D.C. with Jefferson, Lincoln, all those other guys. And it took the mineral doctors 6 years to raise their money for Benjamin Rush. That was the difference of popularity between homeopathy and mineral medicine. But the thing is, they organized. The mineral doctors organized as the AMA in 1846. And sent a lawyer around to basically to pass judgment on all the schools of medicine that existed in the United States. Everybody that was teaching medicine according to what they felt, they gave professional backing to. And every one of us, we always look for that degree, that accreditation. Is it accredited? That's the one I want to go to. Well, all the students stopped going to the other schools. There were 3 or 4 schools of herbal medicine in Cincinnati. Couple in Kentucky, and then some up in upstate New York. So herbal medicine is a rich part of not only United States history, but specifically of Cincinnati history. And actually, David, you don't know this yet, I don't think. David Winston is a friend of mine. He's a really fine herbalist from New Jersey, and I just picked him up at the airport, and you can ask him questions too. Anyways, to make a long story short, Western herbalism has basically followed the medical model exactly. You treat a disease with a specific drug, just as you treat a disease with a specific herb. And it leans toward eliminative therapy. In contrast, Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine, they differentiate. 5 different people with asthma will get 5 different herbs or 5 different formulas. So, and they know when to tonify, they know when they need eliminative therapy. It's not that eliminative therapy is good or bad, or that tonification therapy is good or bad. It's either indicated or it's not indicated. You had a question, you had your hand up a few minutes ago. Ma'am.
Have you heard that the Lloyd Library was the best herb library in the world?
Yes.
Why do you think we're in Cincinnati?
I heard that on just a radio talk show. But I don't think there's enough people in Cincinnati that realize it.
Oh.
Right.
No.
That's true. Everybody I talked to in City Hall and at the Chamber of Commerce, they knew nothing about it. They said, what library?
Right.
I said, what library? I said, hey, there's people that come all over the world to that library, and it's a shame.
Yeah, I heard about it.
There's a warning that I have to put out right now. Just 3 weeks ago, the FDA put out a memo to all their FDA inspectors to keep a lookout for all herbal products that contain, and they had a list of about 40 herbs, and they're all herbs that we use commonly. For a long time, they were just down on herbs that were potentially toxic, poke, something like poke or lily of the valley, or something like our sassafras, which they.
If you use enough of it, though, you can die from anything.
That's true, and that's the thing. What separates a drug from a poison is dosage. You can get kidney failure from too much spinach. You can drown from too much water. Does that mean it's toxic? No. Everything has to be used in its right place. The biggest thing that the FDA and AMA could say against herbalism is that, yes, but there is no way to guarantee that the person who's dispensing the herb knows their stuff. And it's right. It's true. And that's one of the things we're trying to change, not to set standards for herbalism, but to raise up the level of understanding that herbalists have. The major focus of this symposium we're doing a symposium Saturday, Sunday, and Monday at the Drawbridge Hotel in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky. But the major focus of it is to introduce herbalists and herb enthusiasts to different traditions that exist. Native American tradition, Chinese, Ayurvedic, Western scientific traditions. So that everybody gets talking a common language, so to speak. So we know what we can learn from everybody else. And to start raising up that standard of excellence in herbalism. That's what it's all about. That's what the American Herbalist Guild is all about. And hopefully this will be just the first thing of many that we do in order to do that. My personal opinion is that, and I want to talk more about answer your question more. But the important thing that I like to get across too is that I think everybody should be their own herb doctor. that everybody should be their own healer. Every mother, every father, every grandmother, aunt, or uncle. Everybody should know how to take care of themselves to a certain degree. There's always the time where we have to go out and ask for help. But for common ailments, and 85% of everything that we suffer from is a self-limited condition, meaning if you do nothing, it'll go away by itself anyways. Menstrual cramps, migraine, headaches, colds, flus, most fevers, they'll go away anyways if you do nothing. It's called a self-limited disease. The thing is, we can help our body to process that condition out by using the herbs. And we should know how to do that ourselves. I think at the same time that herbs become more popularized and grow in acceptance, that at the same time there's going to be a battle waged. Mostly it'll be AMA, pharmaceutical companies, and the FDA, as it started already. Because the FDA arbitrarily has the power to go into any health food store and pull off the shelf any product that they choose. And there's very little you can do, because it's hard to fight the FDA in court. A few people have done it and have won. So there's hope. But those people have to have big bucks in order to fight in legal battles, because it's not whether you win or lose. It's whether you survive after the game's over. That's the biggest problem. So at the same time where there's going to be more public opinion toward natural or less invasive therapies, because it's a real problem, and it's something that you pointed out as far as medicine, how medicine evolves along with the culture. And our culture has always been, let's do the most that we can possibly do. Invasive therapy. We don't say, well, let's try this, this, and this first before we have to go. No, we say, let's go in and do an open heart surgery before we tell the guy to change his diet, before we tell the guy to exercise, before we give vitamin inoculation therapy. We say, we know the bypass is going to work, let's do it. We know that all 350,000 women that had a hysterectomy in 1986 all needed it. Medicine evolves with culture, and there's a book that says Medicine and Culture. In France, there are very few hysterectomies performed. And actually, in 1986, 350,000 that I just mentioned, those were considered unnecessary by second opinion. There was a total of 600+ thousand hysterectomies performed in 1986. More than half were considered unnecessary by second opinion. In France, they hardly ever do hysterectomies because they really care about their physical body. So anyways, this gets off of herb subject a little bit, but ma'am. It is. It's used for glaucoma and cancer. Yes, it's under prescription by a doctor. In Chinese medicine, we use marijuana seeds as a laxative, similar to psyllium seeds, psyllium husks. Sir?
I just wanted one more comment. Have you seen, and you kind of touched on it anyway, the AMA or anybody starting to plant down, and you guys like they did chiropractors 20 years ago?
There's a group out of Loma Linda, California, based out of the Seventh-day Adventist college down there, called the National Council Against Health Fraud. That they're a group of AMA doctors that are targeting alternative practitioners. They're also targeting medical doctors that practice alternative methods. In California, there's been a number of doctors that have had to leave California because they've had their license revoked for practicing herbal medicine with a medical license. One man named Bruce Halstead, who's somewhat of a radical, he's a loud, outspoken man in favor of alternative therapies, and he stepped on a lot of toes, and they finally stepped on his. He was convicted and sentenced to 8 years in prison for recommending barley grass in the treatment of cancer. He did not tell his patients to stop chemo or radiation therapy. He just told them to take this stuff. They went to him and said, what can I do in addition to? And he said, do this. Sentenced to 8 years in prison, his sentence was stayed, so he didn't have to serve, but it ruined his life. Totally ruined a big part of his life.
So they've started up and will probably increase.
It looks like FDA action is going to increase over the next few years.
Is FDA and AMA anyway?
Well, very much so. The thing is, we'd like to think in terms of conspiracy, but it's not so much that as much as they are common bedfellows. And they're all manipulated by thinking that they're the ones that know what they're doing. The medical doctors are the ones that say, we've been trained 8 years in medical school in the finest, in the most developed, technologically developed country in the world, and therefore we know we are the experts of healthcare. The FDA regulates drugs, and the pharmaceutical companies have to meet stringent standards, quote unquote, for passing a drug to be saleable on the market with claims. But if you remember, just a couple of months back, there were a number of high-ranking FDA officials indicted for falsifying documents and allowing pharmaceutical companies to falsify documents concerning the passing of a drug, validation of a drug. And the FDA, who's the head of the FDA now, he wasn't the head of the FDA 3 months ago. The head of the FDA 3 months ago had to step down.
Isn't that conspiracy? It's like collusion.
Yes, very much so. And most of the medical doctors that I talk to, and I have a couple of relatives who are medical doctors, and it's pure ignorance. It's pure ignorance thinking that they are the ones that know the answers. Not as much that they don't think we know, it's just that, hey, who's better trained than us? And what she said, it's more, what was the word you used? Collusion than conspiracy. Now, between the pharmaceutical companies and the FDA, it's not that nice because they're natural bedfellows. Because the natural place for a person that was a low-ranking official in the FDA to go work and to move up the ladder, financial ladder, is to go work for a pharmaceutical company because they know the ins and outs of getting drugs passed and what they have to do to. So they go to the pharmaceutical companies and vice versa. People that used to work for the pharmaceutical company, a natural place for them to work is FDA because they know each other's policies. Yes.
I just wanted to bring up the point that you say there's collusion, there's conspiracy, there's this or that. The big question for me is where do they think that they get the right, and in my activities with the allopaths recently, that they know my body?
Because you gave them the right. As soon as you walked in their door and submitted yourself to their diagnostic and their therapeutic treatments, you gave them the right. And I don't say that in a mean way, but I say to all of us, one of the very first things I said is we all have to start learning how to accept responsibility for our own health and not turn it over to whether it be a doctor or an herbalist.
But
we all need help sometimes.
If I'm going, and I won't knock allopathy completely because there are some things that is good for.
Very much so.
I'm specifically seeking that certain type of a thing. Never, except with only this medicine, have I ever encountered people who think that their way is the only way, that this is it.
Why don't you talk to my mom?
Sir.
I mean, it's like they're trained to think that way. They're trained to be like God and control your body and your health and your...
You can tear that down. Every one of us has the ability to tear that down. And it's being torn down now, and it's something that this gentleman said because people are getting fed up. People are asking more and more questions of their doctors where before they were very apathetic and would let the doctor do whatever they wanted to do. That is changing, and that has to change. And it's changing slowly. There's actually, I saw on CNN News 3 weeks ago, most malpractice suits are initiated because of poor communication. Now they're teaching doctors to have they're actually giving classes in medical school to have greater communication skills so that they can be clearer with their patients so they have less malpractice suits. This may open up doors for the major medical establishment to become more caring and develop a bedside manner that they never developed before. But I'd like to get off of this political tangent, right, and get back to herbs because that's what we really came here for. And this is all nice, but I want your questions to be answered too. So.
I was just going to say one thing that if we kind of center ourselves and kind of listen to whatever the energies are that are happening, there's a difference between things that are motivated by ego and fear and things that are motivated altruistically and by love, which is what you were saying.
Oh.
Well, what I was going to say is you said who gave them the right, and basically we gave them the right. There's all these laws passed that say that somebody who's a medical doctor is the only one who's legally allowed to practice medicine. And granted, the laws were not passed during your lifetime, but when these laws come up, and they come up regularly, for instance, there's a concerted effort, a dietitian's bill, being introduced into every state in the entire United States to take away the only people who'd be allowed to prescribe or recommend nutritional supplements, herbs, foods, whatever, would be a licensed dietitian. Okay? Well, that's happening all over the country, and in a lot of states, people are very apathetic. So the people who do, if you don't go out and try to do something about it when they try to take your rights away, then we're responsible for them being able to do that.
And interestingly enough, Cincinnati has the worst dietitians bill in the United States. They have the most restrictive dietitians bill that this country has ever seen passed. There have been similar bills that have been put on the floor and have been, knocked down. But in Cincinnati, it passed, and it's one of the most restrictive nutritional bills in this country. So, anyways, herbs and plants. That's why we're here. I used to drive along the road with my grandfather, and my grandfather would say, I'd want to go up in the hills and pick an herb, And sometimes when I go up, couldn't find plants. I say, hey, Grandpa, how come all these herbs grow right along the roadsides, but you go up in the hills and they're not there, in pollution-free environment? He says, well, the plants like people as much as people like plants. They like being around us too, That's the kind of relationship that I like to see people develop with plants, and to really get to know the plants almost as if they were fellow human beings, because we could not exist without the plants. Who was it? That guy, Keto guy. Remember him? He says it's as simple as this. Plants breathe out what we breathe in. Plants breathe in what we breathe out. Simple as that. Plants breathe in carbon monoxide. We breathe in oxygen. We have totally co-evolved with plants. Without them, we would not exist. They give us our food, our shelter, our medicine, in old days, our clothing. They still, cotton, clothing. Everything that we get from a plant first. Yes.
Plants could exist without us, because they existed
That's true.
millions of years without us, so
That's-
they don't need us.
That's true. And man, meaning human beings, are the most dependent of all of God's creatures on the environment. A waterfall will still flow without man. Man cannot live without the rain. A plant can still grow without man plowing the soil, but we cannot live without the plants. Those are the things we have to learn. There are herbs that can be used, and one of the things I try to do, herbs that are used as medicine, herbs that are used as foods, herbs that are used as cosmetics, as fragrances, and any number of ways you want to use herbs. You can use herbs in cooking. Any way you can use herbs. And my thing is to try to get your interest stimulated to look into them. And one question before I go into the slides. Excuse me? It's no difference. Different herb. Different name, I mean. Herbs, spices, medicine, drug, it's just different names. They're all plants. Phil, you had something to say?
Yeah, I noticed that the cigarette plant, the blue flowers, they grow right along the highway.
Mm-hmm.
And down, I think it's because of all the carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide.
It's probably partly that. It's partly heat too.
Yeah.
Heat, and it's partly transportation because of all the traffic, things get carried to that area. But if you
Don't they also get polluted by the carbon?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, you wouldn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. No. There was a study actually done in Germany where they tested plants that grow along roadsides, and their estimate was that it's best to pick a plant that's 100 yards. It's 100 yards away from the nearest roadside, like a highway. So that's what they figured, because at that distance, there was no detectable amounts of like lead and heavy metal exhaust in the plant. So, ready for slides?
Yes.
Yeah.
As I said, I actually mentioned it before, is that originally aspirin, I mentioned that it was derived from a plant called spirea. This is spirea. The old name was spirea. The spur in aspirin came from spirea, which was originally where salicin, which is the precursor of acetylsalicylic acid, or aspirin, was derived from this delicate little plant. It is kind of tiny, so they started looking for different sources and found rich sources of salicin in all members of like poplar, cottonwood trees, as well as the willows. But I think the major source came from the bark, inner bark of white willow. but this was the original plant that salicin or aspirin was derived from. It's also called meadowsweet or queen of the meadow. Could you flip those for me, Sherry? Just press that.
All right.
Go ahead.
Flip.
And this is another one, digitalis, which most people know about digitalis either as a garden ornamental or because it's their cardiovascular medication. And interestingly enough, where did most of the doctors and drug companies learn about how to use these plants? From folk healers. This is a great case in point. There was a Scottish folk healer, a woman, who taught the medical establishment about the use of digitalis in the treatment of dropsy. Dropsy was an old name for fluid retention or edema, which subsequently causes hypertension and high blood pressure. And digitalis is a powerful diuretic, but mostly because it has an action on the heart. It slows down the heart and makes for a stronger, more efficient heartbeat. We talked and we did I did a radio interview today. One of the questions was, well, why use herbs in comparison to drugs? When drugs are used within their normal dosage range, they often and almost always exhibit you get a number of side effects from them. And those are accepted side effects. The good benefits from them are supposed to outweigh the side effects. People that take them don't feel that, but that's what the medical establishment's ideology is. In herbs, in contrast, when used within the normal dosage range, when used properly, they don't exhibit side effects. They produce the desired results that you want, but without the side effects. That's one of the major reasons for using herbs. There's also an environmental reason. When we use herbs or drugs that were derived from herbs, they were isolated and concentrated and extracted by chemical means. Those chemicals eventually find their way back into our food chain and contribute to our health and our disease later on in life. And from a true health or healing perspective, that's reason enough why you wouldn't want to use drugs and you'd want to use herbs. Because when you use herbs, and ideally they were organically grown or properly and carefully harvested, then you're contributing to the earth. You're using the earth, not abusing her. And that's the thing. We all have to learn. But that's a whole different way of understanding why to use herbs than drugs. But digitalis is a real interesting one. In pharmacy school today, they still teach about 3 stages of digitalis toxicity. The first one being nausea and vomiting. The second one, tachycardia and death. Second one, dizziness. The third one, tachycardia and death, rapid heartbeat and death. Those are the 3 stages of digitalis toxicity. But then they go on to say that you never see the first stage of toxicity, nausea and vomiting, anymore. Andrew Weil, the man who wrote the book Health and Healing, really fine book. He's a medical doctor that specialized in botanical medicine. He raised his hand and asked why. And the pharmacy professor couldn't tell him why that is. Through his investigation, he found that the alkaloid that caused the nausea and vomiting was extracted from the purified substances. It was no longer in the digoxin, the isolated purified substance. And so if you got too much of it, you no longer got nauseous and threw it up. But instead, you went right into the second and third stage, and still there are literally thousands and thousands of people that die every year from digitalis toxicity. The thing is, with the plant, there was a built-in safety mechanism with the plant that is no longer there in the isolated drug. And they say that that's a purified, standardized, isolated drug, and therefore it's better. Wrong. One of the things that we do, David and I do, is collect old medical books and old herbal books. The turn of the century, when people were moving out of using crude herbs and using the purified substances, I've read many accounts of doctors who originally were using digitalis leaves, and then switched to the digoxin. And many of their accounts where they went back to using the digitalis leaf because of the greater measure of safety and greater range of therapeutic effects that they could produce by being able to alter the dosage. A measure of safety that they didn't have with the drug. So at that transitionary time, there were many doctors who knew both sides of the fence. and choose to go back to the natural side. But then those doctors, they get old and they die. And the young doctors are brought up only with the purified substance, and that's what they get used to using. David, you had a comment? Want to switch that, Sherry? Oh, and that's one of the herbs that you can actually grow in your garden. It's really beautiful, really, really beautiful. I wouldn't use it for medicine unless you really got to intimately know it, but it makes it for a beautiful flower. This is another one, and this is actually the plant that literally changed medical history. This is the opium poppy. The original synthesized drug, or I should say isolated drug, was derived from this plant. The plant, of course, is the opium poppy. The drug was morphine. It was the first drug that was isolated from a plant, and that changed medical history. From then on, people thought, hey, we can do it better than nature can do it. Just like Paracelsus felt like, hey, now we can do it better than anybody's ever done it before. Another beautiful ornamental, garden ornamental, but again, I wouldn't use it. Or I should say, I wouldn't recommend using it. Go ahead, Sherry. And this is a species of Dioscorea, or a wild yam. David, what was the species name? Quaternalia. And I put this up here as an example of a drug that's still derived from plants. There's a species of wild yam that grows in Mexico that's much, much larger than this. That's still 60% of all oral contraceptives are derived from this wild yam. Not this one particularly, but a different species of this wild yam. Go to the next one. Excuse me? Huh? Yeah, oral contraceptives. This next section of plants that I want to get into are plants that are used for foods. Again, those are the plants that are used, are some examples of plants that have been used for drugs in modern medicine, but there are others that have been used for foods. And this is one of my favorites. This is prickly pear. In Spanish, they call these tunas, these fruits tunas. In the Virgin Islands, we used to eat the whole plant. What you do is you just take this off after you've sort of carved out these, because they're a real mess. I mean, they get in your fingers like crazy. But you score it down the side and just peel it off. And then you just eat it, seeds and all. And then in the Virgin Islands, we would take the young leaves, the flat leaves, and again, peel it and cut it into strips like green beans and steam it. And a lot of Rastafarians still do that. On the next one. Oh, actually, if we could go back, I'd go back. But see, there's a food, that's all right, Sherry. There's a food that's also used as a medicine. Because we used to use it to draw out boils, where you cut half of the leaf off and you put it on a boil or like a cyst to draw it out, to help draw it out. Or mash up the pulp to use as a shampoo. And also to make a tea out. And they were really nasty. And I said, these guys didn't know what they were talking about, you know. They said it was edible. And then one day I was out on an herb walk with a friend of mine who's a graduate of the California School of Herbal Studies. And she said, hey, have you ever eaten those ice plants before? I said, yeah, I tried. Oh, and what I tried to do, I put it in the creek, you know, so the water would sort of wash away the bitter principle, because that's what, you know, native people used to do. Not with this plant, but with other ones. And it didn't work. I tried steaming it. It didn't work. And she says, did you know they're edible? I said, yeah, all the books say they're edible. And I figured she read the same books that I did. But she said, yeah, they're delicious. I said, you've tried them? She said, yeah. And I just thought she had a weird taste. And then she went over, and it was at a different stage of growth where the flower was already gone. And underneath it, there's a hip. You know, like a rose develops a hip? Well, underneath this is sort of like that. There's an encapsulation that you just squeeze. You just squeeze, and this date-sweet pulp comes out of it that's absolutely beautiful. But I point that out as a lesson. That's the danger of just learning from books and not from experience, you know. But that was a nice one. Go ahead, Sherry. And this is sunflower, one of the finest sources of protein as far as found in the seed that's used. There's also a weather vane, so to speak. The sunflower, you know, always follows the sun, and it's kind of nice, and it droops its head when it rains or when it's going to be cloudy, so you can tell, you know, you can almost predict weather from it. In the old days, my mother said these were grown all over Massachusetts, in everybody's backyard, because meat was a rare commodity, because there wasn't a lot of refrigeration, and you had ice boxes. You didn't have refrigerators, you had ice boxes, and you only had meat on Sundays. And so they got a lot of their protein from sunflower seeds. And this is one of my favorite wild greens. It's called miner's lettuce. And it's one of the highest sources of vitamin C in the plant world. And when these are young and tender, they melt in your mouth, not in your hand. And you just pick them off the stalk, and just eat them, and you can eat the whole stalk. And sometimes the stalks get a little bit tough, but most of the time they're pretty nice. You can put them in salads, you can put them in soups, you can make tea out of it. It's miner's lettuce. It probably grows around here too. Everybody knows this, right? This is one of the most common spices, rosemary. This is rosemary. Aside from its culinary purposes, it's one of the finest herbs to use for the treatment of headaches. If you don't know what the cause of the headache is, try a tea of rosemary, and it works really well. It also has mild diaphoretic properties, as far as if you had a young one that had a mild fever, you could use a tea of rosemary to promote diaphoresis, so sweating, which then brings the fever down. The thing is with fever, a lot of people are scared to treat fever. And something, to say about Western medicine saves lives. Western medicine excels at crisis intervention, and antibiotics are sometimes necessary, and surgery is often necessary. I would rather have the help of a paramedic and surgeons if I'm bleeding to death on the side of the road than have somebody stuffing cayenne pepper in my wounds, unless that's all they had. But we have to keep things in perspective of where Western medicine excels and where they fail, where herbalism excels and where it fails. And oftentimes, herbal remedies are not the remedies you want to reach for in crisis intervention unless you're really, really skilled at using herbs as crisis intervention. And there are a lot of herbs you can use like that, but you really have to know your stuff. One of the interesting things about rosemary, before Sherry jumped ahead, one of the interesting things about rosemary is very, very high in what are called antioxidants. Antioxidants are like the type of vitamin or nutrient that anybody that lives in a modern society should be taking these days. Common antioxidants are like vitamin A, E, C, zinc, and selenium, which help to protect our tissue from pathogenic invasion as well as the premature deterioration because of chemicals and pollutants and things like that. Raspberry leaves, raspberry fruit, raspberry leaves, again, herbs that are used as food. And the raspberry fruit everybody knows about as far as jams and just eating when they're ripe. But the raspberry leaf is one of the most commonly used herbs for menstrual cramps, common female complaints, so to speak. One of the finest herbs that you add to a formula to promote lactation as well. It's a nutrient-rich herb, but most women use it for menstrual cramps. Very cheap, too. Anybody know what this is? It's watercress. And I worked with a German naturopathic doctor in Canada who, in the old days, he said this was like penicillin. They used to use this for syphilis and gonorrhea before they had penicillin available to them. And I don't know what a lot of the antibiotics are sulfur-derived antibiotics, and watercress is very, very rich in sulfur, and I'm figuring that that's why it was used. Interestingly enough, sulfur would be, in Chinese medical terms, would be considered a very hot substance that you would use to treat syphilitic-type diseases. Something that's very bitter, very spicy and pungent, and very hot to drive out the damp heat. And that's one we can use in food. There's the tuna again, prickly pear. And rose hips, another high source of vitamin C that's really delicious. After the first frost, you pick these and these are really sweet. Then after that, they're really thready and tough. But you can always make a tea out of it, and you just pick it off and pull these filaments out. And if you do it nicely, the seeds will come out with it. But if not, you got to break it apart and take the seeds out. The seeds are sort of really stringy and fibery, and it's better if you use it without the seeds. And everybody knows this one. See, and here's an example of a plant that you can use the whole plant, either for medicine or for food. The young dandelion leaves were used as a pot herb or greens back in the old days, and by some people still are, in a bitter green. And if you remember, or I should say, in America, we are a sweet and a salt-craved nation. We sort of stay away from, 10 miles away from, bitter substances and sour substances. We also tend to avoid bitter and sour experiences. But in order for us to really participate in this life as full as we can, we have to. You have to take the bitter with the sweet, the sour with the nice, you know. You got to start incorporating bitter greens or bitter foods into your life. Interestingly enough, is the bitter taste has a specific physiological action of stimulating the production of bile from the liver. The liver is the major organ of detoxification in the body. So when you're when you're like on the vegetarian side of things and on the deficient side of things, when you're talking about cleansing, detoxification, best off using something like dandelion greens or dandelion leaf or dandelion root. It's also rich in minerals, which will also build as it cleanses, and you're not purging yourself.
Rhubarb?
No, rhubarb is more of a purging cathartic. It's for deficient people, it wouldn't be indicated. And the unfortunate part of it, because it's a purging cathartic, it'll cause weakness and dependency over a long term, you know, if you use it too much. So anyways, the leaves, as a pot herb as well as a tea, for building up your blood and anemia. The root is a phenomenal diuretic, and there was a study done in Germany in which they tested the diuretic properties of dandelion root in comparison with Lasix, the drug Lasix. It was as effective as a diuretic as Lasix, but whereas Lasix causes potassium depletion, dandelion root actually raised potassium blood levels. So it was much, much safer and effective diuretic than Lasix was. The flowers, you can take the flowers before they get the pollen on them and throw them in a salad and just eat them like that, or saute them in a pan with butter, and they're really nice. And last but not least, you make a wish.
Excuse me, how about the mustard greens? They'd be the...
Mustard greens, same way. And back in Kentucky and probably in Ohio, all throughout the Appalachian area, wild mustard greens were widely used. There is a warning that you also always have to, you know, give with anything. We were talking about it before. Everything in moderation. A little bit of something can be good where a lot is bad. Well, mustard greens is like that. Too much can actually cause stomach cancer. Too much. And that's the thing. Excessive use of anything can be damaging. So, this is teasel. And this is interesting. And David, I don't know if you know of any Native American uses of teasel, but teasel is not in America, huh? Oh, that's why. Teasel is an herb that grows in, you know, tons and tons of pastures all around the country. And I had never found any traditional uses of teasel in the Western books, and I was just curious why, and David just said it's an introduced species, and most likely it was introduced late. But in Chinese medicine, we use teasel to treat arthritis and rheumatic pains. We use the root of the teasel. And here's where, with the increase in communication between different cultures and how they use their plants, we can learn more about the plants that have been naturalized or introduced into this country as well. And many herbs were introduced from other countries, and Native American people, in a lot of ways, learned a lot from early settlers, and early settlers learned a lot from Native American people. And that's the thing. We have this wealth of communication ability now. We should use it, use it for all of our benefits, and learn from every other culture. Go ahead, Sherry. This is the first herb I ever learned about, and it's yarrow. And yarrow, again, you can use the whole plant. I carry a bottle of the ground-up root in my first aid kit as a hemostatic or a styptic. The leaves you can use the leaves and the flowers make a powerful, diaphoretic to induce sweating and fevers. And the leaves make a great digestive aid. I mean, the flower, you can use the whole plant for a digestive aid, but the leaves are a little bit more milder than the flowers are as far as bitterness goes. And the flowers are much better for fever, whereas I think the leaves are much better for digestion, but it's a moot point because the whole plant's good. You didn't want to hear the story, huh? All right. Okay, Sherry didn't want to hear the story. There's a nice story that goes along with yarrow. But this one's wild oats, and this is another one that grows in every pasture under the sun. And it's a grass, and for most people it's a noxious weed. But if you see these things at a certain time of the year, and it was in California, it was about a month and a half ago, you squeeze this and it exudes a white milky substance that's really sweet when it's ripe. At the beginning of the milking stage, it's very, very sour, sort of dry and astringent. But then as the season goes on, a few more weeks, it gets really sweet. And that's when I pick them, is when they're really sweet, not sour or not astringent. It's one of the finest nerve tonics that you can ever use. Most people in America, when they think of something to help them sleep, they think of sedatives. But in Chinese medicine, you tend to think of nerve tonics, unless specifically the person does need sedation as well. But you look at nerve tonics, things that nourish the nervous system, so it allows the nervous system to relax. Wild oats is one of the finest. Wild oats is actually widely used in addiction clinics because it's been shown to help people with ease people through withdrawal symptoms. At the same time, there was a paper that was written in Sweden about the aphrodisiac properties of wild oats, which, according to the research, it's a powerful aphrodisiac. And it makes you wonder, you know, when they say he's sowing his wild oats. There you go, you know. Everybody knows this, right? White man's foot, or the herbal Band-Aid. This is plantain. And what is that? Plantain. And you really can't get a grasp of this, but you know what this is? This is asphalt. This is asphalt, and this is one of the busiest roads in Aptos. And look at the size of that thing. That plantain was that big. I mean, the thing was huge. I've never seen a plantain that big in the wild. Plantain, this is in California, right in my neighborhood. Yeah, about the road, carbon monoxide, sucking up carbon monoxide, why they get big. This is the thing that taught me, the heat. I think the heat more than anything else. Because every place where I see plants growing by asphalt, it's really big. And I think it's the heat more than anything else that causes them to grow so big. It's not in the asphalt. I think it's just the heat that's generated from the asphalt because it's black and it just pours that heat down on it. Early days, it was called white man's foot because everywhere the white man stepped, they said that this stuff grew. Some botanists say that this was naturalized here, meaning that it was a plant that originally was not on this continent, brought over by the white man, and then it just, started proliferating itself. It's naturalized. It'll grow here forever and ever, amen, probably. Some botanists also feel that no, that in fact it was a native plant of this country. Personally, I don't know. But another one where the whole plant can be, it's a medicine chest in a plant. You can use the root. In the old days, they used the root for rattlesnake bites and use the leaves as a poultice to draw out rattlesnake venom or any kind of bites. My girlfriend's little girl, Heidi, she went out in the yard and she got bitten by, I don't know if it was a bee or a spider or something. She got bit and she couldn't find us. And I came out and I looked at her through the window, and the next thing I know, she's pulling plantain leaves, off of my yard is just full of plantains, and she chewed it up, into a pulp, and she put it right on there, and she went back to playing. It was great. Go ahead. Now, this is a plant that should be commonly known by all you folks. It's burdock. Yeah, it's a burdock root. Another example of a plant, the whole plant can be used. The large leaves can be used as poultices and fomentations. The root is widely used as a blood purifier, mostly for skin conditions, but also can be used for food. It's widely used in Japanese cooking. And it's one of my favorite herbs for building the blood, as far as eating burdock root in miso soup for building the blood in somebody who is weak, deficient, and has anemia. The next one. And another one, yellow dock, very similar in properties as burdock, but more bitter. And here's another one. Every part of the plant can be used. The root is most often used. Some people say it's the most easily very, very easily assimilable form of iron, so it could be used for anemia again. There was one paper that was published that said that it doesn't actually contain iron, but it increases the body's ability to absorb iron. I don't know which is true. And this is the thing. This is where we could use Western science to help us to better understand the actual mechanisms of why the plant works. But the fact of the matter is, the plant still works for anemia. You don't really have to know why it works. You just have to trust. Or once you know, you trust that it does. And it doesn't matter why it works. It just does. Sherry. She wants to go home. She wants to go home. No, something I wanted to mention about the yellow dock is the leaves contain a proteolytic enzyme. And on one of the Indian camps that I lived in, we used to wrap buffalo meat in yellow dock leaves to tenderize the meat. And also it would take the seeds, there's billions of seeds on a stalk, and just pull them off. And then you have to rub them in your hands and then winnow them off. But the seed makes a really, really fine flour. So this one's nettles. This is actually my all-time favorite blood tonic. It built up my sister's hematocrit in a week. She was tested and found to be clinically anemic in less than 1 week of 2 cups of nettle tea every day and ferrum-phos, homeopathic ferrum-phos. Her hematocrit was normal. The doctors, if you talk to a doctor, they always tell you come back in 2 or 3 months and we'll see if it's raised. You know, months, not weeks. And this stuff worked phenomenally well. The last crop of nettles that I picked was on an Indian reservation called Thule Indian Reservation. And whenever I go picking herbs, and especially if it's on a reservation, you always go to somebody and ask permission, you know, because that's their backyard. You know, you don't want somebody coming in your backyard and just pulling up your plants, you know, even if they are wild. So I went to one of the old guys and I asked him, I said, hey, there's some herbs here I'd like to pick. And I said, all right, I want to find out who I asked to get permission. He says, well, what plant you want to pick? And I said, stinging nettles. He said, take it all. Take every last one. He said, those guys, they didn't use it. You know, they didn't use it, and to them it was a burden. It was a bother, you know. So I really snagged up some fine nettles last season.
Do you make the tea out of the dry?
Yeah, dry or fresh. And actually,
Is one more potent or anything?
well, there's different ways to look at it. There's different ways to look at it. If I have my druthers, I'll always go with fresh. But if you were to measure vitamin and mineral content or medicinal content, like active constituent of dry versus fresh, dry is higher because then you don't have as much water in the plant, so it's more concentrated. But there's something in that life of the plant that's not measurable that also has its medicinal effect. So I myself prefer fresh. Now there are some herbs that you don't want to use unless they've been aged. Cascara sagrada is one in particular. You want to use aged bark that's been aged for about a year and a half, or something like that. And I'm sure there are other herbs. So another one, common meadow herb, mullein. And again, the whole plant can be used. In the old days, the mullein root, and this fell out of use for some reason. Mullein root was used as a glandular tonic, but it's hardly used anymore. I still use it. But not very many people do. The leaves were the original Dr. Scholl's. You know, native people used to put the leaves in their moccasins, and I've actually put them in my shoes too. And they're very, very soft, almost like a cushion. They are like a cushion. It also makes great toilet paper in the woods. And in the old days, and even old day Europe, the women used to take it and rub it on their face as a natural blush, you know, because there's tiny hairs that cause a redness, a nice shiny redness to the cheeks. Most people use the leaves for mucus congestion, for coughing, but specifically mucus. It's more, some books list it as a demulcent, but when I don't get any demulcent properties from it myself, but a lot of books call it a demulcent. It is definitely used for coughs and mucus, and that's where I use it, is in mucus. The thing you have to know about mullein is when you strain off the tea of the leaves, use a really fine, like cheesecloth, because the tiny filaments can be irritating to the throat. The seeds, which occur in these seed pods here, there's about 300 seeds per pod. And there's actually laws on the books that prohibit the use of mullein seeds for fishing. Is what native people and early gold miner guys used to do is grind up the seed, throw it in a pond of water, and it's a narcotic, so it knocks out the fish, and the fish would go belly up, and they'd just scoop them up. And so there are actual laws in the books that outlaw the use of mullein seeds and other narcotics, as well as dynamite for fishing. Sir?
Those leaves, do they expel the mucus, or do they suppress the mucus?
I personally think that it helps to as an expectorant. more than anything else, but it also has a drying property, which would lead me to believe that that also arrests mucus discharge. But the thing is, and this is another thing, mucus is not the sickness. Mucus is only a reflection of the sickness, and it's actually part of the healing process because there's mucus being produced because of irritated lung tissue. And what you want to get rid of is the irritation, not the mucus. But the thing is, so a lot of people, they use antihistamines that'll stop the mucus production. And it's a really poor way to treat upper respiratory congestion. Yes, it'll work very fast and very acutely and get you breathing again, and that's where antihistamines should be used in asthmatic attacks. But for common colds and excessive mucus, you should let it run its course and actually use demulcents, things that are actually slimy. One that I used to always use, comfrey root, that I don't recommend to most people to use anymore, just for different reasons, mostly because of a lot of talk about toxicity, which I don't worry about too much, but in all good, conscience, I have to use it with care with people now. But there are a lot of demulcents, marshmallow root, slippery elm, which are very, very soothing to irritated tissue, and that's what you want to do, soothe the irritated tissue and use expectorants to get it out, get the irritant out of the lungs. These are the flowers of the mullein, and what you want to do here is go right into the field with a glass of a jar of olive oil, and just pick the flowers and put them right into the olive oil. And if you have that much olive oil in a jar, pick a good handful, really saturate the olive oil with the mullein flowers, and let it sit on the windowsill for a couple of days, strain it off, and you get one of the finest oils that you want to use for inner ear infections and earaches. And what you want to do is you warm up the oil, and you put 2 drops in each ear, and then cover it with a cotton ball, and always treat both ears. There's been times that we've treated one ear, put it in one ear and see the infection go to the other one and back and, and literally go back and forth. And so you always treat both, even if the infection is only in one. And you also want to treat it internally. Next one. And this is red clover. This is a species of red clover that I think I took this up in Colorado. And just because it was really beautiful, it had a lot of color. Most of the red clover you see in the market, like when you want to go buy red clover tea, is brown clover. And it's either been picked at the wrong time, or when it was dried, it was fried, not dried. And I would question its medicinal potency. There's only a few people around the country that really have fine red clover. A guy named Ryan Drum, and then Trout Lake Farm had some really nice red clover last season. Red clover in the 1800s was one of the most widely used herbs for the treatment of cancer. It was a major ingredient in a formula called the Hoxsey formula, and the eclectics used it a lot for the treatment of cancer. As far as medicinal constituents, it contains a constituent that's called coumarin. Coumarin derivatives, or coumarin-type drugs, what they do is thin the blood. In Chinese medicine, when you look at tumors, what's a tumor? It's indicative of stagnation. It's either stagnation of fluids or stagnation of blood or stagnation of qi, nervous energy. It's like a pond. You dam up a pond, and you stop it from flowing, and it starts to fester, and funguses and molds grow, and it gets polluted and really raunchy, stagnant. Well, that's what a tumor is indicative of, internal stagnation. You use substances that promote the flow of either fluids, energy, or blood, and you dispel the tumor or the stagnation. And red clover is one of them. Sir?
Speaking to Jim Duke last week, he came up with something very interesting about red clover, and that is that they just discovered a chemical called genistein, which occurs in the Leguminaceae family, happens to be found in a fair amount of red clover, and it's being shown to be a very potent anti-tumor.
Is that right?
Substance, yeah.
See, this is funny. Now, science inevitably validates what folk healers have learned or have known throughout the ages. And one of the sad things about it is that all the chemicalized testing that's done, all the literally millions of animals every year that are slaughtered to prove the effectiveness of an herb or a drug, they don't learn anything more about that plant than has already been known in the folkloric literature. And that's the real sad part, or sad statement, about our system of modern science and modern medicine. And it is a sad one, but that's a nice one about red clover. Yes?
But if my observation is those types of habits are the dominant culture has to assimilate what the culture is trying to rob information from is by duplicating the knowledge and proving it according to its own realities.
Sure. And everybody has to do that. Every culture, every society, every person has to do that. We have to find our own understanding and our own answers about things. And it's unfortunate that in the process of doing that we tend to rape other cultures and bastardize it. That's the real problem. We all have to find our own answers and come to our own understandings, but we shouldn't do any damage in the process.
Next.
Yeah. Oh, one interesting thing about red... No, I'm kidding. This is an herb called mugwort. It's one of the most common wayside weeds that you find growing along every river and stream and creek and stuff like that. Probably the most widespread use of mugwort is actually for burning and as a diaphoretic, but burning in sweat lodges. One of the things that we do with it all the time is lay it on the floor of a sweat lodge and sit on it. And when it steams up, that's all you smell is that mugwort, and it's really nice. Medicinally, I guess most people, more than anything, I don't use it a lot medicinally, and mostly because you can't find good mugwort on the commercial market. And when I do use it, I pick it out of my garden because I actually have it grown in my garden, which it takes over your garden. But very, very strong aromatic and very, very bitter principle in it. It's used for menstrual cramps and bringing on blood flow. Some people use it as an abortive. It's not a strong abortive, though, as far as I know. David, can you say something about mugwort?
Well, it's a primary ingredient in moxa.
Oh, right. In Chinese medicine, we use a thing that's called moxa sticks, which looks like a cigar-looking thing that you burn and you heat up points. And it's made from a species of mugwort because that aromatic principle makes it penetrating. And we use it to actually tonify and strengthen people. Put it on specific points, heat up specific points, and it gives you energy. Go ahead, Shirley. And here's another one. This is evening primrose, as far as which is a real example of what we were talking about as far as political and economic and legal things concerning herbs. First off, as far as medicinally goes, evening primrose contain the oil of the seed of evening primrose contains one of the highest sources of already made gamma-linolenic acid, GLA. GLA has a wide range of applications as far as medicinally. It's one of my favorite substances to use as an anti-inflammatory, mostly for internally mediated inflammation like migraine headaches, some PMS, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis. Those are all conditions that are caused because of excessive production of inflammatory prostaglandins and leukotrienes from the liver. GLA specifically inhibits the production of inflammatory prostaglandins and increases the production of anti-inflammatory prostaglandins. Unfortunately, the FDA confiscated $1.5 million worth of evening primrose oil from a distributor in California last year because it works. It really works. And for some people that have another use that I use, any kind of neurological damage, MS, carpal tunnel syndrome, you always want to use an unsaturated fatty acids because the myelin sheath that surrounds most nerve tissue is made up of unsaturated fatty acids, and they're deteriorated by inflammatory prostaglandins. So a lot of people with MS, this is the only thing that ever helped them. And it was hard to come by there for a while. You can still get it, but there was an importation ban put on, and I think people were smuggling it in, but there seems to be a large enough supply. So there's another sad statement of a phenomenal, safe, and effective herb. And interestingly enough, there's GLA. There's so many studies on GLA derived from different sources proving it's safe and effective that it's not a question as to toxicity or to effectiveness. The thing is, they say that if, by FDA rules, the thing that makes a drug is that if you prove that something is safe and effective for the treatment of a disease, and you make that claim, then it is a drug. Period. It is a drug. If tomorrow you said that broccoli cured cancer, and you put it in a pill and said that this is cancer-curing broccoli, that would now be considered a drug, labeled a drug. If you put garlic in a capsule and say that it can be used for high blood pressure, which broccoli is a cancer treatment, and garlic is treatment for hypertension, but if you say that about that, then you're prescribing a drug. And therefore, you are subject to arrest for practicing medicine without a license. So that's evening primrose. But it's a beautiful garden ornamental. But what you want to do, if you have this grown in your garden, just a few plants, make sure you pick the seeds. Make sure you pick the seeds before they hit the ground, because once these seeds hit the ground, forget it. You'll have it coming all over your garden, and you'll be wishing that it was gone. So just keep a couple of plants there. Miss.
Black currant has the same properties as evening primrose oil. Get it from
Black currant and another oil called flaxseed, they don't actually have already made GLA in it. There are some plants that have already made GLA in them. Evening primrose is one, borage seed oil is another. However, black currant seed and flaxseed oil are rich in GLA precursors, which is good, which it gives the body the things that it needs to produce GLA. The unfortunate part is that that conversion from GLA precursors to GLA takes place in the liver. And most modern-day men, women, and children have toxed out livers. And a lot of times, the liver can't make that conversion. So if there's any questions as to whether or not the person can transform the precursors to GLA, you always give evening primrose or borage seed oil. Borage seed yields 2 or 3 times the amount of GLA for the same price as evening primrose. But there was a study that actually said that evening primrose was more effective. So 6 one way, half a dozen the other. Excuse me?
What part of the plant do they use to make the drug?
The seed. The seed is used. It's the only part of the plant that I know of that's used. But it's one of my favorite, but it is expensive too. But it's a good one. It does work, yeah. This is an herb, and one of the things I like to get across too in these talks is that in the old days, a lot of people that were writing herb books were saying because herbs are natural, they are safe. And that's not necessarily true. And this is not really a good example. I do have a few good examples, but this is not really a good example because it's a fine, fine medicine. This is lily of the valley. Mostly why I put it here is because it's beautiful. The lily of the valley is one of the most commonly used heart tonics in England. There aren't a lot of people in America that use it as a cardiotonic, mostly because I think, anyways, because there haven't been a lot of people that know the accurate dosages to use for lily of the valley. Most of us have sort of grown up in the herbal world somewhat scared of using it, and then when David Hoffman wrote his book Holistic Herbal, and he feels it's one of the finest heart tonics, and most of the information he didn't have any cautions with it, which every place that we read about lily of the valley, it has a lot of cautions with it. So most of us were sort of hesitant about using it, but I'm interested in starting to play with it now. There are 2 things that I love dealing with more than anything else. That's cardiovascular disease and gynecological conditions. And the reason is because the options, the therapeutic options are so severe, i.e. open heart surgery and hysterectomy. And with herbs and vitamins and diet and lifestyle, you can literally cure, and I use that word loosely, forget about cure, but you can literally successfully treat any type of gynecological condition and almost any type of heart condition that I have known of, except for a hole in the heart. But anyways, lily of the valley is one that's used. It's widely used as a cardiotonic in Europe, but not in America. And Western books always have a caution with it, where in England they're not so scared of it, it seems. Next one. But this one here, this is my favorite all-time cardiovascular remedy. And this was taken at Harvard Botanical Gardens, the Arnold Arboretum, and this is hawthorn flowers. Most often I use hawthorn berries, but these days most often I use the whole plant, meaning the leaves, the flowers, and the berries. I feel that the hawthorn berries have a much stronger effect, specific effect as a tonic, as like a nutritive tonic for the heart, whereas the flowers, and this is by putting pieces of information together from Europe and America, the flowers seem to have a much better effect on lowering cholesterol levels, where the leaves have a much more astringent quality as far as actually toning the cardiovascular system. But that's my own deduction of how to use hawthorn as a plant. But that's another one. One of the first ones I've ever learned from this woman who's 92 years old. She would use hawthorn berry for every type of cardiovascular condition that came through the door. And I really love the plant. It's a beautiful, beautiful plant, and just the things I've seen it do is phenomenal. It's actually one of my favorite sleep remedies. And this is interesting because in most American books, it's not listed as a sedative or calmative or anything like that. But in Chinese medicine, we say that the spirit resides in the heart. When you have a troubled spirit, you have a troubled heart. And when you want to calm or tonify the spirit, calm and tonify the heart. Hawthorn berry is one of the finest heart tonics that you can use, and gentle and safe. And here's another interesting one now that I think of it. In Rudolf Weiss's book, Herbal Medicine, which is a man who's a medical doctor in Germany, in a country which uses herbal medicines widely, and he is a researcher. He's been practicing herbal medicine for a good 60, 70 years. He's in his 80s now, I guess. And they pulled apart every single constituent of hawthorn berry that they could. And not one of those constituents had any effect on the cardiovascular system whatsoever. But when you put it together, it's phenomenal. So there's one in particular, where breaking apart the plant, it's not going to yield any information. You have to use it in its whole and pure form. Go ahead. And this is another one. This is the most widely used cardiac tonic in the Virgin Islands. And this is called Night Blooming Cereus. This flower, it's pollinated by bats, and it's about this big. It's huge. It's overexposed. I was on top of like a 15-foot high cement wall that was 6 inches wide. And this plant was amazing. This plant covered a wall that was this big, and it came out of a small pot like that. It was growing out of a pot. It doesn't need a root system in order to grow. It needs some connection to water and soil, but it mostly, because of these little things here, it attaches to the wall. It's almost like an ear plant. It takes in light and oxygen, I guess, from and nutrients from the ear, and just grows. But it was massive. They only bloom at night. In the Virgin Islands, they're called Cinderella plants. I was lucky because I got this one before the sun hit it. The one thing that I smuggled back from the Virgin Islands last time I went was a gallon. I got a couple of liters of vodka and put it in a big Coke syrup jar, and picked a whole bunch of flowers and put them in there and screwed on the cap real tight, covered it with plastic, put it in the bottom of my backpack, and smuggled it back. And I was lucky they didn't look, So, next one. And this one, you could just look at, and just sort of know what it does. It's just beautiful, and it's magical, and it's relaxing. And it's lady slipper. And lady slipper is one of the finest nervines that you could ever use. A really, really beautiful, beautiful plant, and literally one of the finest nervines and sedatives that you can use. Unfortunately, through overpicking and increased development, lady slipper is reaching threatened status as far as endangered plants go. And the American Herbal Products Association, which is the trade organization for herbal companies, some herbal companies, they have helped to pass, sort of like a resolution to not participate in commerce of lady slipper, in hopes of saving it, to prevent wild stands from, going extinct, so to speak. Unfortunately, a tremendous amount of lady slipper is still being shipped to Europe to supply European drug markets, and that's the sad part about it. Go to the next one. There's another one. This is another one that we took this picture at Gaia last year, David. There's an herb symposium that goes on every year in Boston, Massachusetts, which is a really fine one called Gaia Herb Seminars, and it's really a nice one. But this is one of the plants where, remember when I said that I really like to turn people on to having a connection with plants as beings, as being alive. They say, there's a story that says that this plant, that there was a little girl that walked far away from her camp, and during her walk she saw a rabbit who had bloody feet, and she took her moccasins off and gave it to the rabbit, and the rabbit took off. And the little girl started walking back to her camp, but pretty soon her feet were sore and bleeding until she couldn't go any farther. And she kneeled down on the ground and she cried because she was in pain. And the Creator looked down on her, and she knew her kindness because she gave her shoes to the rabbit. And as her tears hit the ground, the lady slipper sprung up. And she looked through her tears, and she knew they were for her, because it looked like a little moccasin. And she put them on her feet, and immediately the pain was gone. And she walked back to her camp and gave that medicine to her people. If you look right in, if you look right inside the lady slipper flower, there's a little dot of red that looks like somebody just stepped right in it. A little blotch of blood that's still inside the lady slipper to remind us of the little girl's kindness, and that that's the way that we should be. And that's the relationship that we should have with plants. When you go out and if you ever see a lady slipper, you're going to look at that plant in a different way than you've ever looked at it before. And it's going to make you happy. And when you're happy, it makes you well. There's much more to plants than meets the eye, so to speak. Go ahead. And this is elderflowers. Elderflowers is one of the most widely used diaphoretic herbs as far as for an herb that promotes sweating, most often in combination with the yarrow and peppermint to bring down fevers. Elder also makes a really, really fine eye wash, and the elderberries makes a great elderberry wine or elderberry jam. There's another plant that the whole part of the plant can be used. One of my teachers in the Virgin Islands said that when you break a branch of elder, it cries like a baby, so you have to do it with care. There's a horsetail. Horsetail, another name for horsetail is scouring rush, because in the old days, pioneer-type days, the horsetail shaft was used to clean pots and pans because it is very bristly, like it's a natural Brillo pad. It doesn't have soap, but it does have enough strength to hold up and really scrape things off of a pan. The most widely used therapeutic applications of horsetail is as a diuretic. Too much horsetail, unfortunately, can be irritating to the kidney, so it has to be used in conjunction with other herbs that are soothing and demulcent. But then another application of it is, many of you probably have seen in the health food stores, supplements of silica that are used to strengthen hair, skin, and nails. While most of the silica originally was derived from horsetail. Horsetail is very, very high in silica. And an easily assimilable form of silica. Silica can also come from obsidian, but it's like the difference between eating a rock compared to drinking this as a tea. So it's really fine source of silica for strengthening bones and nails and hair. Go ahead, Sherry. And this is an herb that hopefully will bring a little bit of attention to the herbal community from the medical community. It's milk thistle, Salima marianum, or Mary's thistle. And Mary's thistle, because you really can't see it here, but the leaves have white veins that go through the leaves. And they say that's the milk of Mother Mary. Interestingly enough, the milk thistle in the old days was used to stimulate lactation. Many thistles were. Some people actually eat it as a pot herb, like a green. But if you look, these are real spiny, and what you have to do is take a pair of scissors and cut around them. It's really a tedious job. So there are other greens that are more easily accessible, but this would be a fine bitter green, similar to the dandelion and the mustard greens, to eat if you were stuck someplace. The part of the plant that's used is the seed. If you'd go to the next one, this is the seed head. And this is another thing about knowing herbs. It's not enough to know that an herb is good for a specific disease, but you have to know the right time to pick it, how to prepare it. And this one, milk thistle, it goes through 2 periods in its seeding stage, so to speak, where the head opens up, and then it closes again, and then it opens up. Originally, I guess it opens up, I don't know, for the sun to get to the seed, I don't know, and starts some enzymatic process, and then closes up, and the seed ripens. Because if you get it that first time, many times you'll find there are immature seeds inside. So you got to get it at that second opening, and I don't know how to tell about this, when that second opening is. If you go to the next one. And this is a tiny seed. It's about the size of a flaxseed, a little wider, a little longer than a flaxseed, and really dark brown, sometimes black, very oily when you're doing a liquid extraction of it. The part, like I said, is mostly used is the seed. The information that we got on, and the way that we really learned about using milk thistle seed is from German research. And I don't know if it had a long historical use of milk thistle there, but they found that it was safe and that it was the only effective antidote for Amanita mushroom poisoning. Amanita mushroom is the death angel, death cap, where in 45% of the cases, even when treated through conventional methods, is fatal for 45% of the people. For obvious reasons, in using milk thistle extract for the treatment of Amanita mushroom poisoning, they did not use a control study for obvious reasons. But everybody that they gave the milk thistle extract to survived. And I don't know if it's been 100% over the last bunch of years. The last information I got was 2 years old. So I don't know what's going on in the last two years. But the medicinal effects of it, one, is that it's a phenomenal liver protectant. It protects the liver against damage. That's what it does with the way that Amanita mushroom poisoning kills you is because it destroys the liver. The milk thistle extract, for some reason, protects the liver from that damage, which means that it can also protect the liver from damage from environmental toxicity, which to me makes for a really important therapeutic application. The second key thing about milk thistle seed is that the liver is the only organ in the body other than the skin that can regenerate itself. Milk thistle seed extract speeds up the regeneration process by about 5 times. So anybody that has history of cirrhosis, hepatitis, malaria, or liver damage, milk thistle is the one that you want to use. Go ahead, Sherry. And this is shepherd's purse, common wayside weed, which is a real commonly used hemostatic, mostly by midwives. One of the key things to know about shepherd's purse is that you need to use it fresh. Dried shepherd's purse is almost as soon as it dries, it turns to straw. And as a medicine, is probably worthless. So you really should use dry shepherd's purse to depend on it as a hemostatic. Go ahead, Sherry. And this is one of my favorite as far as for bladder infections. This is my favorite all-time remedy for bladder infections, and it's sumac berries. And this thing, you can make a tea out of it, really, really strong, astringent, and tart, very sour. And make a tea out of it for bladder infections, or make a drink out of it, a lemonade, like a sumac berry lemonade out of it. And it really makes a fine drink. But that's what I use it for, bladder infections more than anything else. Go ahead, Sherry. And here's another one, another plant with the story. This was the most widely used plant that we use in the Virgin Islands as a sedative, and it's passion flower. And they're called passion flower because of the Passion of Christ, what they used to call in Old Day Europe the Passion of Christ. And again, our history is written in plants. If you count these sepals here, there's 10 of them, of the 10 faithful apostles. This purple rosette is like the crown of thorns when Christ said. There's 5 anthers that hold the pollen, the 5 wounds of Christ. 3 styles, which are the nails that were driven in. And interestingly enough, it's used as a sedative, as a calmative. And that's the thing that spirituality should give to people, is peace. Any type of spirituality, it should give you peace and happiness. And that's what this plant does. And it's just nice, again, to have those stories in our plants. Go ahead, Sherry. Oh, there was an interesting thing about passion flower. I brought my grandpa to the doctor one day, and we had just left a woman herbalist house in the Russian River in California, and she gave me a passion flower. And I brought him to the doctor's, and I waited outside, and I took my finger and ran it underneath, to get the pollen. And I just ate the pollen off of each of the things there. And in less than 5 minutes, I was out like a light. I mean, and I slept until my grandfather came out, but really peaceful and that fast. And I don't know if I was exhausted or it was a passion flower, but It shows you what it does, it can do. And this is the passion fruit, which is used as a food and a lemonade in the Virgin Islands, but we also use it to lower blood pressure. We use a drink out of passion fruit to lower blood pressure, and people that have low blood pressure are told not to drink it, because it'll lower them more, and it could actually cause them to faint. And this is a neat thing about being in the Virgin Islands. Everybody in the Virgin Islands knows something about bush medicine. Everyone. They all know that a person with low blood pressure can't take passion fruit. They just all know that. It's common knowledge. Every doctor, every priest, every 10-year-old kid knows that. And it's nice to be part of a culture like that. Talking about herbs that you can grow in your garden, this is one. Common ornamental feverfew. And feverfew gained notoriety a few years ago. There was articles in the Enquirer and the Globe and all the trash newspapers, so to speak, because it was found safe and effective in the treatment of migraine headaches at the London Migraine Clinic. And the first book that was written on feverfew in the United States was by a guy named Ken Hancock, and I actually edited the book. And most of the research that was done at the London Migraine Clinic were on the use of the leaves. And people would go out in the garden and pick 3 or 5 leaves and just chew them every day. And one of the side effects of, there were 2 side effects of feverfew. One was contact dermatitis. Every once in a while it would irritate the mucous membrane of the mouth. The second side effect was that it reduced inflammation in arthritic patients. That was the second side effect of it. So most people use it for migraine headaches and arthritis. A lot of the preparations on the American market, unfortunately, are made from the complete above-the-ground part. And because our herb industry is very young, we as an industry don't have the skill to dry our plants to preserve the aromatic qualities and volatile oils that are easily lost upon drying. And so much of the feverfew on the market is questionable. And there are a lot of people that have gotten benefit from feverfew capsules, so I don't want to poo-poo it completely. It's just everything in its place. If you get feverfew for a migraine headache and it doesn't work in capsule, grow it in your garden and start eating it off the stalk at 3 leaves a day and see if that works. Anybody recognize this? What? Honeysuckle. Honeysuckle is again it hasn't been widely used in American herbalism, but it is widely used in Chinese herbalism, and as a herb very similar to echinacea, an anti-infectious herb, and mostly when you have infections of a pussy nature, where there's a lot of heat, a lot of inflammation. That's where honeysuckle is used. Next one.
Which part of the plant is used?
Those little florets. The little florets is what's used in Chinese medicine. What?
It just became a room this week.
Is that right? And this is another one. This is another one that may bring a lot of attention to the medical community and looking at herbs. It's called ginkgo biloba. And ginkgo is one of the oldest living trees on the face of this earth. It's the only living member of its genus left. There's herbs are classified according to genus and species. And there are many different species of many different plants. Well, there's only one species of ginkgo left. That's ginkgo biloba, 2 lobes, as noted by here, 2 lobes. Ginkgo biloba. It's one of the most pollutant-resistant plants on the face of this earth, and can grows in a lot of cities like New York City. It's one of the only plants that can survive the pollution of New York City. Because of that, there's a lot of potential danger for using ginkgo leaves that are very, very high in lead, if they're gathered in cities where they most often grow. So again, you got to be careful of your sources. But anyways, there's a ginkgo extract that's used in Germany and has made its way into the American market. That's a 24% standardized ginkgo extract that's used for the treatment of senility, Alzheimer's, and for improving mental function. The way that it's said to work is by increasing cerebral blood flow. One of the things that I've learned about ginkgo is, yes, that it definitely does work. But in Chinese medicine, you have to differentiate between what types of herbs you give to what type of senile patients or memory-deficient patients. And because it increases cerebral blood flow, you have to be careful about using it in people that already have too much blood flow, as in hypertensive patients, which most of the people using it are old, and many people in America have hypertension. I know of 2 people that, after 1 month using the standardized 24% extract of ginkgo, had a stroke. Both of them were hypertensive. One was in his the woman was in her late 40s. The other man was in his early 50s. The unfortunate part, nobody under the sun is writing about the contraindications or the cautions to be used with ginkgo. And this is unfortunate because most of the literature written on ginkgo is written in German. And there's only a few people in the country that really get a lot of the medical journals from Germany. I lived in Germany for 2 years, and I get some of the medical journals, but I still don't read well enough to be able to translate them. But I've read a lot of translated articles about ginkgo. And there's 2 things happening with ginkgo in Germany, where the product was popularized. One is that the courts have tried to force the company that produced the standardized extract to prove its claims. And the courts were not satisfied that the company could not prove it to the court's satisfaction. I don't know what that means. I don't know if the courts are like they are here or whether it was justified. The second thing that's happening on the German market is that there's talk about making the ginkgo extract in its oral form only available by prescription because of other side effects that are noted with it, such as dizziness and migraine headaches, 2 things which it, interestingly enough, also treats. The thing is, it treats dizziness and what else did I say? And headaches due to insufficient blood flow to the head. If you already have too much blood flow to the head, i.e. hypertension, that's the type of person that it could worsen. So you have to differentiate and you have to use it with care. You had a question, man?
For example, to use for mental, efficiency?
Yeah. Memory loss, improvement.
Cerebral palsy person.
I don't know. I really don't know. There's one book that's about that thick. That's all it's. Yeah. It's totally written about ginkgo, and it had nothing about cerebral palsy in it. But it did have an interesting. It did have an interesting note with the hypertension, in which they said that it raises the blood pressure in hypotensive rats, and that leads me to believe that people that have high blood pressure should not use it too. So you got to be really careful.
Well, I'll make one other point.
Hold on 1 second, David. This woman was saying something here. What?
Epilepsy treatment of seizure resulting from loss of blood flow.
I would probably try it. I don't have a lot of experience. I don't have actually any. Let me see. I take that back. I've worked with 2 people that had epilepsy years ago, but most of what I do is work on the nervous system. I've never thought about increasing cerebral blood flow to the head. I don't have a lot of experience with epilepsy, so I couldn't answer you. David?
I would just make the point that when you're talking about a standardized 24% ginkgoside product, you're not talking about whole herb anymore.
Right.
The ginkgosides, which are a type of plasmoglycoside, which is found in the leaf, is not found in that kind of concentration in the leaf naturally.
Right.
It's concentrated extensively. So what you're talking about is you're talking about an herbal drug,
Right.
not an herb anymore. It's not a whole herb. So when you're taking ginkgo as a leaf or as one of the lower potency extracts, it does not seem to have anywhere near the side effects it does when you start making it that strong.
And this is one of the keys to understand about this. There's a whole movement to turn the herb industry into a standardized extract industry. It takes 50 pounds of this herb to make 1 pound of the extract. 50 pounds. You ever drink carrot juice and it turns you yellow? Well, who has ever sat down and ate enough carrots to turn you yellow? Probably none of us. When you concentrate something to like the nth degree, that's what will happen. You get side effects and toxic reactions. And it's no longer anywhere near the natural food that it once was. And you can't say, well, that's a natural thing. Yeah, but it doesn't matter because it's not found in that form in nature or in that concentration. And as we said before, the thing that separates a drug from a poison is dosage. And that's the thing we have to keep in perspective. More is not always better, and that's been the problem with American mentalities, that we want extra strength, new and improved. It's not necessarily better. Let's learn how to use these things and, with common sense. Go ahead, Sherry. And this is American Angelica. This is Angelica archangelica. It was grown at Ken Taylor's garden in Southern California, really beautiful herb garden. And this is one of the most widely used herbs in European medicine, mostly as an aromatic and digestive bitter to stimulate the production of bile. It also has a very, very healing effect on the liver. It's one of my favorite digestive aids. And a lot of the bitter liqueurs that are in liquor stores, they have Angelica as an ingredient. Go ahead. And this we once thought was licorice root, one of the most commonly used plants around the whole world. But then and everybody was selling it as licorice root. And I put this in here just to, again, bring out some of the issues that surround herbalism in the United States. Once it was botanically classified by somebody who knew what they were doing, it turns out that it's goat's rue, which very few people use goat's rue as medicine, even though it does have medicinal properties. I've never used it as medicine. But the thing is, it shows the mistakes that can be made when people think they have certain plants, and then we go to this garden and say, this guy really knows what he's doing. And so we buy plants and we give it to somebody else and we plant it in our garden. Somebody walks by and say, yeah, that's licorice root. But then 2 years later, when you try harvesting the root, there's no sweetness to it. Then you say, gee, what's going on here, And some of the farms, they grew, acres of this stuff. And it wasn't licorice root. It's goat's root. But anyways, go ahead, Sarah. This is calendula, another one that you should really grow in your garden. And there's another one where Mary's little girl, Heidi, she was playing outside with a friend, and the friend dropped a rock on her foot. And the friend started crying, and Heidi said, don't worry. And she grabbed up a bunch of flowers and rubbed them in her hands. And she put it right on the foot, and they went back playing, And if adults were around, the kids would have freaked, But they were doing their thing by themselves, and she took care of it just with the calendula, Calendula makes a phenomenal salve as far as diaper rash, healing cuts, things like that. I also use it internally for stomach ulcers, phlebitis, and varicose veins. So those are some of the things I use it for. There's lavender. And these are sort of the ones you can grow in your garden. There was a woman in the back that asked about herbs that can be grown in the garden. And here's a beautiful one. It's beautiful to look at, beautiful to smell. And 3, makes a nice tea or a bath, and a relaxing bath. You can also make massage oil out of it for relaxing massage oil. And you want to use the flowers. And I don't know quite how to grow lavender so you get these really rich blue flowers. Mine always come out pale. There must be a secret or a nutrient deficiency in the soil, or a specific nutrient you need to turn it really blue, but I don't know what it is yet. And nobody I've asked knows what it is yet. But it's a phenomenal plant, medicinally or ornamentally. An Oregon grape. Oregon grape was one of those other herbs that was one of the first, and that I learned about, mostly for skin conditions and and as a liver tonic, stimulating the production of bile. It's one of the best. It's one of my favorite all-time liver stimulants as far as bile production goes. And when you stimulate the production of bile, you do an awful lot of things as far as health-promoting things in the body. Just because, I should say, conservative estimates, Western scientific and medical estimates, are that the liver is involved with 450 different processes, bodily processes. The higher estimate is that 2,000 different bodily processes. So it's like the liver is like a big-time control station for the body. And whatever you can do to heal the liver will ultimately improve your overall health. Go ahead. And here's another one, which is a good example of plants that you have to be careful using. This is Datura, or Jimson weed. This one specifically is Datura suavolens, I believe. A trumpet flower, really, really strong, perfumey, aromatic. In the Virgin Islands, I think me and my teacher were the only people that ever used this. And we used it for pain and to induce sleeping. But it's also hallucinogenic, so you have to be careful about using it. If you go to the next one, this is the seed pod from another one. Thanks for coming, folks. Happy birthday. That's all right. Happy birthday. You're welcome. This is the seed pod of another type of Datura, Datura metalloides. And inside that seed pod, there's a couple of dozen little seeds. And I had an interesting experience, is that I picked this seed pod, and I was going to grow it outside my house. And I had to carry the seeds around in my hand for about an hour and a half. And like I had a bathing suit on with no shorts, and I had a t-shirt on with no pockets, so I carried it around in my hand. One of the very first things I learned living with Native American people was to control your thinking, or pay attention to your thought process. After carrying these seeds around in my hand, my thinking was really, really off, and I didn't understand what was going on. I said, where are these thoughts coming from? Because that's what you look, hey, where you come from, And they were just really weird. And then all of a sudden, I looked at my hand, and I said, that's it. There's a drug called scopolamine, or atropine as well, that's derived from species of Datura. Have you ever seen the motion sickness patches? Those are they're on the skin. Those are scopolamine patches. Scopolamine is absorbed through the skin. Again, I said they have hallucinogenic properties. There's actually been doctors that have been threatened to be thrown off the staff for drug abuse. And one guy, actually I think it was two guys, it was found that their lab coat, the coat that they wore every day, they'd come in and put their coat on, and it was soaked. It had atropine. They had spilled scopolamine liquid on their coat, and it was being absorbed through the skin, and by the end of the day they'd be zoned. And there's a high rate of drug abuse in the medical profession among nurses and doctors, and they just thought this was another guy, but he swore up and down, passed lie detector tests, and they found out that sure enough it was being absorbed through his skin, and it originally came from this plant. Go ahead. This is poke. This is the fruits of pokeberries. Old days, poke was used a lot. It was another one that was used in the Hoxsey formula for the treatment of tumors and cancers, and was always used for lymphatic cancers, and it makes a phenomenal poultice for breast lumps. But you got to be careful in using it. Actually, the young greens you can eat as a pot herb. I use the root, but I don't use any other part of the plant. Those berries really make a really dark blue, but not very bright dye. I mean, it's dark blue, but then it gets pale very, very fast. But in the old days, people used to use it as a blue dye. Go ahead. And another one that used to be used in eclectic medicine is not widely used anymore, false hellebore or veratrum, which was used as a liver tonic. Again, it's more like a liver purgative. I don't know a lot about it, but it was a beautiful plant, and I just pointed out as, again, another plant that you got to be careful about. Go ahead, Sherry. And these ones I'll run through fast, because we're getting late here. Anybody know this? Besides David, I should say. Huh? Bloodroot. How'd you know that? I know it. Oh, really? Bloodroot is another one that was always used for lymphatic cancer. It's not that widely used anymore. It's becoming more popular to be used now. There's not as